My daughter convinced me to gift her my entire jewelry collection for her wedding. After I handed it over, she laughed and said, "I'm just gonna sell these anyway, Mom. I need the cash more than old jewelry." I smiled, congratulated her, and left. A week later, she called me hysterical because the jewelry store owner had called the police and she was being investigated for trying to sell stolen property. My name is Diane Foster, and I'm 62 years old. I spent 40 years working as a pediatric nurse before I retired 3 years ago. I've been a widow for 5 years now. My husband Daniel died from cancer after we'd been married for 37 years. Losing him was the hardest thing I've ever been through, but he left me with so many beautiful memories and one very special collection. Throughout our entire marriage, Daniel had this wonderful tradition. Every major occasion, every birthday, every anniversary, when our children were born, he would buy me a piece of quality jewelry. Not cheap costume stuff, but real pieces that would last forever. A gold bracelet for our 10th anniversary. Diamond earrings when our son Owen was born. A strand of genuine pearls for our 20th anniversary. An emerald ring for my 50th birthday. Over 40 years together, these gifts added up to a significant collection. On top of what Daniel gave me, I also inherited jewelry from my mother and my grandmother. Some of these pieces dated back to the early 1900s. My grandmother had several Art Deco pieces from the 1920s and 30s that were absolutely stunning. There were vintage brooches, sapphire rings, antique gold chains, all kinds of treasures. Every single piece had a story attached to it. When I looked at my jewelry box, I wasn't just seeing pretty things. I was seeing my entire life, my family's history, the people I'd loved. I had the collection professionally appraised years ago for insurance purposes after there was a break-in in my neighborhood. The appraiser told me everything together was worth approximately $180,000. I nearly fell out of my chair. I'd known the pieces were valuable, but I'd never thought of them in terms of that kind of money. I just thought of them as my memories, my connection to Daniel, and to the generations of women in my family who'd come before me. I have 2 children. My son Owen is 29 years old. He teaches middle school history and lives in a small apartment across town. He's always been the responsible one, thoughtful, and grounded. He visits me regularly, calls to check in, and has never once asked me for money, even though I know teachers don't make much. Then there's my daughter Natalie. She's 32, 3 years older than Owen. Natalie works in marketing and makes a decent salary, probably around $70,000 a year. But she's always lived beyond her means. Ever since she was a teenager, she's wanted the best of everything. Designer clothes, expensive cars, luxury vacations. She was constantly asking me for money to cover her credit card bills or her rent when she overspent. 6 months ago, Natalie got engaged to a man named Chad. He's a real estate agent. Seems nice enough on the surface, but I noticed pretty quickly that he and Natalie share the same problem. They both spend money like it's going out of style. When they announced their engagement, they immediately started planning this huge, extravagant wedding. Designer dress, luxury venue, destination bachelorette party in Mexico, the works. I was happy for my daughter, of course, but I had concerns about how they were going to pay for everything. I'd always told both my kids that my jewelry collection would be divided between them someday. I planned to leave it in my will, split 50-50. So they'd each get about $90,000 worth of jewelry. They'd have both the financial value and the family heirlooms to remember me by. Owen had always seemed touched by this, but never asked about it. Natalie, on the other hand, had asked me several times over the years when she'd get her share, which always made me uncomfortable. I never imagined she'd find a way to get it early, and I definitely never imagined what she'd do with it once she had it. Before we continue with what happened next, subscribe to this channel and comment where you're watching from. I'd really love to hear from you. 3 months before Natalie's wedding, she came over for lunch and everything changed. 3 months before Natalie's wedding, she showed up at my house for lunch on a Saturday afternoon. We sat in my kitchen eating sandwiches, and I noticed she seemed emotional, quieter than usual. Her eyes kept getting teary, and she'd dab at them with a napkin. Finally, she reached across the table and took my hand. She said, "Mom, I need to talk to you about something important. It's about the jewelry collection." My stomach tightened immediately because I knew where this was headed. She continued, "I know you've always planned to leave the jewelry to Owen and me when you pass away, but I was thinking, what if you gave me my half now, as a wedding gift?" I pulled my hand back and said carefully, "Natalie, that's an enormous gift. Those pieces are meant to last you your entire lifetime. They're your inheritance." She started crying harder, real tears streaming down her face. She said, "I know, Mom, and I understand how big it is, but this is my wedding. This is the most important day of my life. I want to wear some of Grandma's pieces when I walk down the aisle. I want to carry on the family tradition and feel connected to you and Dad and all the women who came before me. It would mean everything to me to have them now, to incorporate them into my wedding, instead of waiting until after you're gone." The way she said it made me feel guilty for even hesitating. She made it sound so beautiful, so meaningful. I told her I needed time to think about it. Over the next few weeks, Natalie brought it up constantly. Every phone call, every visit, she'd find a way to mention the jewelry. She'd talk about how much it would mean to honor our family at her wedding. She'd describe which pieces she wanted to wear with her dress. She'd get emotional talking about how wearing Grandma's pearls would make her feel like the whole family was there with her. She was relentless, but in a way that seemed heartfelt. I started to believe she genuinely wanted these pieces for the right reasons. After about a month of this, I finally agreed, but I wanted to be fair to Owen. I decided I'd give Natalie her half of the collection now as her wedding gift, and Owen would receive his half later, maybe when he got married or at some other significant milestone. I spent an entire evening going through my jewelry box, dividing everything as evenly as I could by value. I used the old appraisal documents to make sure each child would get approximately $90,000 worth. Natalie's portion included the pearl necklace Daniel gave me on our 20th anniversary, several gold bracelets and chains, diamond earrings, some of my grandmother's Art Deco pieces, including a stunning sapphire brooch, and the emerald ring Daniel bought for my 50th birthday. The day I gave Natalie the jewelry, she arrived at my house carrying an empty designer handbag. I'd carefully packed each piece in small velvet pouches and the original boxes when I still had them. As I handed over each item, I told her the story behind it. I explained that the pearls were from our anniversary trip to California. I showed her the tiny inscription inside the emerald ring. I told her about my grandmother wearing the sapphire brooch to fancy parties in the 1930s. Natalie nodded along, holding each piece carefully, saying how beautiful everything was and how much it meant to her. After I'd given her everything, she stood up to leave, the designer handbag now heavy with my life's most precious possessions. She hugged me at the front door, thanked me again, and I felt good about my decision. Then, just as she was walking down my front steps, she turned back and laughed. She said, "Honestly, Mom, I'm probably just going to sell most of these anyway. Chad and I need the money way more than we need old jewelry. The wedding's costing a fortune, and we want to put a down payment on a house. But thanks so much for the gift. You're the best." She waved cheerfully, got in her car, and drove away. I stood frozen in my doorway, feeling like the ground had disappeared beneath my feet. Everything she'd said about honoring family, about wearing the pieces at her wedding, about feeling connected to our history had been a complete lie. I closed my front door after Natalie drove away and stood in my entryway feeling like the floor had disappeared from under my feet. My hands were shaking. My chest felt tight. I'd just been played by my own daughter. She'd cried, manipulated me emotionally, told me elaborate lies about wanting to honor our family, and I'd fallen for every single word. Now she was driving away with $90,000 worth of jewelry that she planned to sell for cash to fund her overpriced wedding and a house down payment. My first instinct was to call her immediately and demand everything back, but I knew that wouldn't work. Legally, I'd given her a gift. She could claim it was hers now, and I'd have no recourse. I felt helpless and furious at the same time. Then I remembered something important. Years ago, after a house in my neighborhood got broken into, I'd gotten worried about my jewelry collection. I'd taken detailed photographs of every single piece for my insurance company. I'd also had the most valuable items professionally appraised, and my sister Paula, who owns an antique shop, had helped me register several of the inherited pieces in a national database that tracks high-value jewelry. The database was designed to help recover stolen items and prevent people from selling jewelry that didn't belong to them. Paula had explained that any reputable jewelry buyer would check these databases before purchasing expensive pieces to make sure they weren't stolen. I went straight to my home office and pulled out my jewelry documentation folder. Inside were photographs of every piece, professional appraisals with detailed descriptions, original receipts for items Daniel had purchased, and inheritance paperwork for the pieces from my mother and grandmother. Yes, I'd given Natalie the jewelry as a gift, but I'd done it based on lies. She'd told me she wanted the pieces for sentimental reasons, to wear at her wedding, to honor family tradition. Every word had been calculated manipulation to get something valuable she could convert to cash. I called my sister Paula and told her everything that had happened, including Natalie's exact words as she walked out my door. Paula was absolutely furious. She said some choice words about Natalie that I won't repeat here, then told me something that gave me an idea. She explained that when someone tries to sell high-value jewelry to legitimate buyers, those buyers ask questions. They want to know where the jewelry came from, how the seller acquired it, whether there's documentation proving ownership. For pieces that are registered in databases, alerts can be triggered if someone tries to sell them, and if someone walks in trying to sell expensive jewelry quickly without proper paperwork, any experienced dealer gets suspicious because it looks like stolen goods. Paula suggested I contact the major jewelry and estate buyers in our area and alert them about my collection. I could provide them with photographs, serial numbers for pieces that had them, and detailed descriptions. If Natalie showed up trying to sell items that matched, they'd know to question her. I struggled with this decision for several hours. This was still my daughter. Did I really want to set her up to be caught and humiliated? But then I kept hearing her laugh in my head. Her casual dismissal of everything those pieces meant. Her willingness to lie directly to my face and manipulate my emotions for money. I made 3 phone calls that evening. I contacted the 3 largest jewelry and estate buyers in the city. I explained that my jewelry collection had been obtained by someone under false pretenses, and I wanted to be notified if anyone tried to sell matching items. I provided serial numbers, photographs, and detailed descriptions. 2 of the 3 stores took me seriously and said they'd flag the items in their system. The 3rd store seemed less interested, but took my information anyway. Then I did something that felt even harder. I went to the police station and filed a report. I explained that I'd given my daughter jewelry based on fraudulent claims about her intentions. The officer was sympathetic, but explained this was technically a civil matter, since I'd voluntarily given a gift. However, he said the report would be on file, creating a paper trail if the jewelry turned up in suspicious circumstances. I left the station feeling emotionally drained, but oddly relieved. I'd done what I could. Now, I just had to wait and see if Natalie would actually try to sell the pieces, or if maybe she'd have second thoughts. For 7 days, I heard absolutely nothing. No phone calls, no text messages, complete silence from Natalie. I went about my daily routine, trying not to think about the jewelry or what she might be doing with it, but of course it was all I could think about. Every time my phone rang, my heart would jump. Then on day 7, at exactly 2:15 in the afternoon, my phone rang and Natalie's name appeared on the screen. I answered and immediately heard hysterical crying on the other end. She was sobbing so hard I couldn't understand a single word she was saying. I asked her to slow down and breathe, and finally I started to make out fragments of what she was trying to tell me. She kept saying something about police and her work and a jewelry store. Finally, I managed to piece together what had happened. The police had come to her office that morning. They'd walked in, asked for her by name, and escorted her out in front of all her co-workers. The jewelry store she'd gone to had called them. They were accusing her of trying to sell stolen property. She was saying I had to fix this, that I had to call the police and tell them I'd given her the jewelry, that this was all a huge mistake. Her voice was panicked and desperate in a way I'd never heard before. I sat down slowly on my couch and asked her calmly which jewelry store she'd gone to. Through her sobs, she told me it was Prestige Estate Buyers, one of the 3 stores I'd contacted. She said she'd brought in several pieces to get them appraised for selling. The diamond tennis bracelet Daniel had given me when Owen was born, my grandmother's emerald ring that had been in our family since the 1940s, and the Art Deco sapphire brooch from the 1920s. That was one of the most valuable pieces in the collection. She'd told the store manager she'd inherited these items from a relative and wanted to sell them. The store manager was a man who'd been in the jewelry business for over 30 years. He'd examined the pieces carefully and recognized them immediately from the alert I'd sent. The sapphire brooch in particular had a unique maker's mark and a serial number that was registered in the national database with my name listed as the legal owner. When he asked Natalie for documentation proving how she'd acquired these pieces, she couldn't provide anything. Her story about inheriting them didn't match the database information at all. That's when the manager called the police. The police had questioned Natalie right there at the jewelry store. They'd checked their system and found the report I'd filed about the jewelry being obtained through fraud. When they confirmed that I'd reported the items and that Natalie's story didn't add up, they told her she was under investigation for attempted sale of stolen property. They didn't arrest her on the spot, but they confiscated the 3 pieces she'd brought in and told her not to leave the state while they completed their investigation. Then they'd followed her back to her office to verify her identity and employment, which meant all her co-workers saw her being escorted by police. Natalie was screaming into the phone now, her voice going higher and higher. She was yelling about how I was destroying her life, how her boss had witnessed everything, how Chad's parents would find out, how the wedding was ruined. She kept shouting that I'd given her the jewelry as a gift, that I couldn't take back a gift, that what I'd done was cruel and vindictive. I let her scream for about a minute, then I spoke quietly and clearly. I said, "Natalie, you told me you wanted that jewelry to honor our family at your wedding. You cried in my kitchen. You made me believe those pieces meant something to you emotionally. Then you laughed in my face and said you were just going to sell everything for cash. You lied to me. You manipulated me." There was a brief silence on the other end of the line. Then Natalie's voice went cold and hard. She said, "It was a gift, Mother. Legally, it's mine. I'm going to sue you for harassment. And after this, don't expect to ever see me or my future children again." The police investigation took 3 weeks to complete. During that time, Natalie was required to cooperate fully and provide documentation for how she'd obtained the jewelry. When she told investigators it was a gift from her mother, they contacted me to verify her story. I told them honestly that yes, I'd given her the jewelry, but only because she'd lied about her intentions and manipulated me emotionally. I showed them text messages where she'd talked about wanting to honor family traditions and wear the pieces at her wedding. The contrast between those messages and her actual statement about selling everything was clear evidence of fraud. The district attorney's office reviewed everything and offered Natalie a choice. She could return all the jewelry, sign a legal document stating she had no further claim to it, and the investigation would be closed. Or she could keep fighting and potentially face fraud charges for obtaining property through misrepresentation. Natalie chose to return everything. She never apologized, not once. 2 days after the decision, Chad showed up at my door with a cardboard box. He didn't even look at me, just shoved the box into my hands and walked away. When I opened it, I almost cried. My beautiful jewelry, my precious family heirlooms, were thrown together carelessly, like trash. Some pieces were tangled together, others had scratches. A few had already been removed from their original settings, probably so Natalie could sell just the stones and metal separately for quick cash. I spent hours that evening carefully sorting through everything and checking that it was all there. The wedding happened 2 months later. I was not invited. Natalie sent Owen an invitation, but specifically wrote on it that I was not welcome. Owen called me upset, asking what he should do. I told him to make his own choice, that I wouldn't be hurt if he went. But Owen decided not to attend. He said he couldn't celebrate his sister's wedding after what she'd done to me. He told me later that Natalie and Chad had to downsize their wedding significantly after losing access to the jewelry money. Instead of the luxury venue and designer everything, they'd had a simple ceremony at a local restaurant with about 50 guests. Owen said Natalie spent the whole reception complaining to anyone who'd listen about how I'd ruined her special day. I had the damaged jewelry professionally repaired. Several pieces needed to be reset, which cost me nearly $3,000, but they were salvageable. Then I made a decision I should have made years ago. I met with an estate lawyer and created a formal trust for my jewelry collection. The trust specified that Owen would receive his half immediately, while Natalie's half would remain in trust until my death. There was also a clause stating that if Natalie made any legal claims against me or tried to contest the trust, she would forfeit her inheritance completely. When I gave Owen his portion of the collection, he tried to refuse it, saying it was too much and I should keep everything. But I insisted. I told him he'd earned it by being a good son, by treating me with respect and love. Owen kept a few pieces that reminded him of his father and sold the rest through a reputable auction house. He used the money to pay off his student loans completely. He was responsible, grateful, and didn't take my generosity for granted. Natalie and I barely speak now. It's been over a year since everything happened. She sent me a text message on my birthday that just said, "Happy birthday," with no warmth or emotion. She had a baby girl 3 months ago, my first grandchild, but I've only been allowed to meet her twice. Both visits were brief, awkward, and felt like Natalie was doing me a favor rather than wanting me in her granddaughter's life. It breaks my heart that I'm missing out on knowing my grandchild because of my daughter's bitterness and entitlement. But I've accepted that some relationships can't be repaired when the other person refuses to acknowledge their own wrongdoing. I've learned some difficult but important lessons through this painful experience. I learned that manipulation doesn't stop just because someone is family. In fact, family members often manipulate more effectively because they know exactly which emotional buttons to push. I learned that protecting yourself sometimes means disappointing people you love, even when it costs you the relationship. I learned that giving in to someone's demands doesn't create gratitude or closeness. It just teaches them that their tactics work and they can use them again. Most importantly, I learned that I'm worth defending, even from my own child. If this story resonated with you, please subscribe to this channel and leave a comment below. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Owen comes to my house for dinner every Sunday now, often bringing his girlfriend Sarah, who's wonderful, and treats me with genuine kindness. We talk about his students, his plans for the future, and eventually about starting his own family. He promises me I'll be an involved grandmother when that day comes. The difference between my two children couldn't be more clear. One understands that relationships are built on mutual respect and honesty. The other sees people as resources to be used for personal gain. I didn't create that difference, but I did enable it for far too long by giving Natalie whatever she wanted to avoid conflict. My jewelry collection sits in a safe deposit box now, properly secured and fully documented. I wear pieces occasionally, and each time I do, I think not just about Daniel or my grandmother or my mother, but about the day I decided I deserved better than being manipulated and disrespected. The emerald ring on my finger isn't just beautiful. It's a reminder that sometimes love means saying no. Sometimes it means letting people face the consequences of their choices. And sometimes the most valuable thing you own isn't jewelry at all. It's your self-respect and your refusal to let anyone, even your own daughter, treat you like you don't matter.